Listen for the word of God for us today from John chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. There was a man sent from God, whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify to the light, so that all might believe through him. He himself was not the light, but he came to testify to the light. The true light, which enlightens everyone, was coming into the world. He was in the world, and the world came into being through him. Yet the world did not know him. He came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. But to all who received him, who believed in his name, he gave power to become children of God, who were born not of blood or of the will of the flesh or of the will of mankind, but of God. And the Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. John testified to him and cried out, "This is he of whom I said, 'He who comes after me ranks ahead of me, because he was before me.'" From this fullness we have all received grace upon grace. The law indeed was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God. It is God, the only Son, who is close to the Father's heart, and who has made God known.
Today is the ninth day of Christmas, and finally the cold and snow that we have all been expecting has arrived. It's replaced the California-like mid-60s of Christmas Eve. Perhaps it's because of staffing problems at the North Pole that winter arrived late this year, but for whatever the reason, it is beginning to look a lot like Christmas. So while there is such a close association between Christmas and winter, the truth is that there is neither scientific nor historical proof that Jesus was born on December the 25th. It wasn't until sometime in the 3rd century that the church set the date of Jesus' birth, designating the day following the week celebration of the Roman holiday of the solstice, Saturnalia, as Christmas Day, as a day when the days became a little noticeably longer for those who were paying close attention. So the promise of light has already begun coming upon the earth. If we were to go back 2,000 years, can you imagine what a huge celebration it would have been to see the turn from winter into the beginning of spring? Today's reading from John captures this dual celebration of the birth of Jesus, coinciding with the emerging light of spring when he announced, "What has come into being was life, and the life was the light of all. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." The Sunday before Christmas, Catherine May, a British writer, was interviewed by Krista Tippett about Mrs. May's new book, Wintering: The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times. Their discussion was so compelling to me that I immediately downloaded a copy of her book and devoured it in 4 hours. Even hibernating animals have appetites that have a hard time being quenched. This book brought to mind a training exercise where the facilitator began the process by inviting us to remember and to choose our favorite season. And we could all try that here. So what is it? What's your favorite season? Is it spring, summer, fall, winter? At home you can stand up for your choice. Well, the facilitator then had us get into groups based upon our season of choice. And in our respective groups, we had to come up with a compelling argument about why our season indeed was the best. Well, from that experience, I remember that there were closely the same number of people who chose spring and summer and fall, but I don't remember many people standing up for winter. In fact, they seem to be a little different than the rest of us. So while most of us would not choose winter as our favorite season, there are things about winter that we celebrate. We love Christmas. We have a nostalgia for remembering all of the events that have happened the previous year. We like to live in hopeful anticipation for the new things that are coming in the new year. We love the quiet and the soft beauty of a fresh snowfall that blankets the earth. We like to sit by the fire and read a book and have something warm to drink. We love times playing with kids and grandkids and friends, gathering with family and friends, a slowed pace of life that winter often brings to us. As a child growing up in North Carolina, I remember the excited anticipation for those rare days when snow was predicted. I stayed up continuously checking the skies thanks to a well-placed street light where I could see if it was snowing or not. Seldom used sleds and boots and winter wear were at the ready for the hope that indeed there would be snow. Too often, it was a disappointment, but on those days when it snowed, it was glorious. My Presbyterian college in eastern North Carolina didn't get as much snow as my hometown, and so we didn't see much snow there, but there was a break. We had a winter term, and during that term, you could focus on one class, and that was a glorious thing to be able to have that attention on one particular subject. It also helped the GPA, which needed help at the time. But now we are entering our 43rd Nebraska winter, and I've learned that winters are to be taken seriously. They are real. They're cold, they're long, and sometimes they can even be dangerous. I know that, God willing, when Easter arrives, there will be a sizable exhale in our household, praising God for helping us get through yet another one. But unlike most of us who are ambivalent about winter, Catherine May embraces it. Rather than fleeing the damp, gray chill of British winters for warmer, sunnier climes, her chosen winter travels took her northward. She described trips to Iceland to experience the hot springs, followed by an icy plunge into a snowbank. She traveled to the Arctic Circle in a small boat to experience the wonders of the Northern Lights. She learned from experts what it means to sauna, a verb. She even moved to the west coast of England so she could enjoy the beach and swim in the surf. In the winter? Those and many other tips for embracing winter she offers are certainly worth trying for those of us who are winter averse. However, the lasting message that Catherine May leaves for us is less about the predictable season of winter and more about the times where winter breaks into our lives at any season of the year. She observes that winter is a metaphor for those places in our lives when we feel frozen, out of step, or even unable to take the next step, which can come at any time and in any season. The titles of the chapters of her book are mostly months and sometimes particular holidays. And the first chapter is entitled September. And it takes place on a hot day in England, and her husband suddenly becomes seriously ill, and most of that chapter deals with his illness and the difficult recovery that he has. About midway through the book, another chapter is entitled Epiphany. In Epiphany, she describes her 7-year-old son and the terrible anxiety attacks that he is having about being in school. She's forced to take him out of school and to homeschool him for the second half of the year. And so while she is doing that, schooling her son, taking care of her ailing husband, teaching a course at the university, writing this book, she is overwhelmed. She knows that winters don't last forever. She's learned that. She's learned that there are times when in winter that you discover blessings that God brings to us, sometimes hidden. So for us, for nearly 2 years, we have been either struck in one very, very long winter or a series of 4 or more consecutive winters that keep coming one after another. For many of us, it's been terribly hard. It's not just the estimated 5.5 million people in this world who have died from COVID, or the 850,000 Americans who have died from COVID, but they're the school children and the teachers who have been impacted. There are the families who have been unable to be together. There are businesses who have gone under and employees who have lost their jobs. There are medical professionals and other essential personnel who have been physically and emotionally overwhelmed by their horrendous workload. And yet, in a 2-year induced winter, we're still able to find the benefits of COVID times. Life is quieter, simpler, less hurried. We get to spend more time at home. We once again learn to enjoy the simple things like playing games and solving puzzles and reading and walking and talking on the phone. We learn about FaceTime and Zooming and other creative ways to experience time with one another. In fact, getting through this winter, which is so often filled with solitude, we discover how important it is to be with those we love in whatever way we can. And on those cloudiest of days, in our circumstantial winters, we find that we need our true friends, those who will stand beside us, those who will tolerate our gloom and allow us to be weak for a while we're trying to get on our feet again. Catherine May's book begins in September, and it ends in March. And in the second to the last chapter of the book, she describes how in late winter she had lost her voice, which is a serious problem for somebody who teaches at a university and somebody who is invited to oftentimes address people with the issues that she is working on in her books. And the harder she tried to find her voice, the harder it was for her to speak. And so a friend made a suggestion. The friend said, "You used to like to sing. I think you should go and take voice lessons again." She didn't have anything to lose. She remembered how she loved singing as a child in her church choir, and so she did it. And she worked with the voice teacher who brought her voice back in a new and more musical kind of way. For us, it may take that. It may take spoiling ourselves a little, learning to sing again, taking a walk in the woods, reading a favorite book, talking to a friend, and in time, a new world awakens. a world she describes as gleaming and green and alive with the beating of wings. And through it, we discover that we have a kind of gospel to tell now and a duty to share it. We who have successfully wintered have learned some things, and so our hearts sing out like birds and our voices fill the air. We can do no other. Isn't that beautiful? Finally, today at the beginning of this new year, we celebrate one life, an important life, the life of Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who died at the age of 90 on the day after Christmas. He was born to a teacher, his father, in South Africa. Desmond Tutu followed his father's footsteps for a couple of years prior to his calling to the ministry. And while he was trained for the priesthood in London, his true calling was always to serve the people of South Africa. At the age of 43, he became the first black dean of St. Mary's Cathedral in Johannesburg. 10 years later, at the age of 53, he became the first black bishop in Johannesburg, also receiving the Nobel Peace Prize that same year. A year after that, he became the Archbishop of Cape Town, the highest position in the Anglican Church of South Africa. 9 years later, when he was 62 years old, apartheid finally came to an end. For the first time, Desmond Tutu and all of the people of South Africa were able to vote. Think about that long winter that he and the other people of South Africa had lived as you hear Desmond Tutu describe that magnificent new day. He said, "How do you convey the sense of freedom that tasted the sweet nectar for the first time? How do you explain it to someone who was born into freedom? It is impossible to convey. It is like trying to describe the color red to someone who was born blind. It is a feeling that makes you cry and laugh at the same time, to dance with joy and yet fearful that it's just too good to be true and that it might just all evaporate." For 62 years, Desmond Tutu lived a continuously dark and relentless winter. He never lost hope, which made him able to see that there is light in spite of all of this darkness. Having already been awarded the Nobel Peace Prize 10 years earlier, Archbishop Tutu faced one final and monumental challenge. When the new government appointed him as chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a 17-member body that was charged with uncovering, investigating, and resolving the many atrocities committed during the apartheid. The process for the investigation began. It began by going directly to the people, those who were most closely impacted. And the people were allowed to tell their stories of what happened to them. And then they had the challenge of figuring out how to bring about reconciliation, what to do about all of the atrocities that they had learned of. And this is where it became particularly compelling. The people of South Africa were deeply, deeply divided about how it should all be handled. First, there were those who insisted that justice needed to be served and those guilty of the crimes needed to receive the harshest punishment. And there were others. There were others that believed the way of reconciliation should prevail, and that amnesty should be afforded to wrongdoers who are willing and able to admit their crimes. Desmond Tutu, much like Martin Luther King Jr., understood that more violence, even if it was justified by the state, was not the answer. He felt that applying the gospel to this monumentally difficult issue in this newly reformed nation was the only way. He said, God's dream is that you and I and all of us are to be one family, and that we are made for togetherness, for goodness, and for compassion. The incredibly hard work of reconciliation, bringing together a divided nation, was led by this indomitable spirit of one who took to heart God's radical command that we love God, that we love our neighbors, that we love ourselves. But the one most difficult love is that we learn to love even our enemies. Lastly, in hard times, we need to hear and heed those prophetic voices who lift our dampened spirits and who motivate us to move out of our darkness and to follow God's light. Exactly 1 year ago, our nation experienced a brutal winter moment, one that still lingers near to us. And yet, in the shadow of that moment, through the voice of one brilliant young prophet, God spoke again the words from Micah. Everyone shall sit under their own vines and under their own fig trees, and no one will make them afraid. She was talking about coming home to be safe, coming home without fear of losing our way. But how can that be? And she explained it. It's because that is our legacy. For there is always light if we will only be brave enough to see it. If we will only be brave enough to be it. Amen.